see a lot of folks here on this busy holiday week. So today our guest speaker, Reverend Tensan Ramey, he is a Sōtō Zen priest. He received Tokudo in 2014, so he's been a Zen priest for quite a while. He is also the leader of the Zen meditation group that meets here every Thursday in the evenings. I've been meeting here for more than a year. And Sensei Minister Koyama, our resident minister, is out of town this weekend in in Portland, because he's overseeing the Portland Temple. And he suggested that we invite Reverend Ramey to speak with us today, to talk a little bit about his perspective. So it might be unusual, right, for those of you who might be joining us today, and those of you who've been coming, this temple belongs to the tradition of Sōtō Shū, which is a particular school of Buddhism that originated in Japan, but has its roots deeply in the tradition. And in the Sōtō Shū tradition, meditation is not part of our tradition. And in the Zen tradition, it's what Zen literally means, is meditation. So it might be unusual to have Reverend Ramey here speaking to us today. However, there's a lot of similarities, historical connections, and some other similarities. So our tradition was founded by Shinran Shonin, who's pictured directly to your right of the Buddha Amida. Shinran Shonin began life as a young man who lost his parents when he was quite young, and he was sent to be a monk before he hit the age of 10. He went to live on Mount Hiei in Japan, which was the center of Tendai Buddhism, which is the dominant form of Buddhism at that time. This was right before, this was in the late part of the 12th century. He eventually got dissatisfied with the elaborate rituals and the kind of high philosophical language and the lack of intensity of personal experience that he found on the mountain. He came down, he found a teacher, and he started the tradition of Sōtō Shū. Sōtō Zen was started by a guy named Dogen, who was about 27 years younger than Shinran. He also lost his parents before the age of 10, was enrolled as a monk, went to live on Mount Hiei, the center of Tendai. He also became dissatisfied with the elaborate rituals, the high philosophy, and the lack of personal experience. He came down off the mountain. He found a teacher. He ended up going to China, and he brought back Sōtō Zen tradition to Japan. Sōtō Shū is the largest tradition of Buddhism in Japan today. It's also one of the larger traditions in the U.S. Sōtō Zen is the second largest tradition in Japan, in terms of numbers of temples and adherents. And it's also, in a small way, fairly widespread in the U.S. If you were to go to Japan to go to a temple, you would actually see a lot of things that you would recognize as Sōtō Shū followers. Going to temple, hearing messages from the priest, celebrating Ohigan, Hanamatsuri, Obon, all of those things are done. Festivals and dancing. For a small portion of people in the Sōtō Zen tradition, they also decide to pursue seated meditation. Now, this is the place where our traditions differ, but there's actually a similarity in that in our Sōtō Shū tradition, Shinran taught us that saying the Nembutsu, the thing that we said many times today, the same way, doesn't accomplish anything. You can't make it do something. You can't turn it into a spiritual practice of accomplishment. You can't do it better than anybody else. You can't be a better Nembutsu person than someone else sitting next to you. You can't, so there's, I'm going to say it really good this time, right? Interestingly, the Sōtō Zen tradition is quite similar. You sit on the cushion without a game to do anything. And if you start thinking, I'm better than the person next to you, first of all, you're wrong. But also, that's not what it's about. So there's differences between the traditions, but there's also some similarity. So Reverend Ramey has been practicing Zen for a good portion of your life. He'll talk about that a little bit today. He studies with Jakusho Kwang Roshi, who is the founding abbot of Sonoma Mountain Zen Center. He's 90, and he has been practicing Zen since the 60s, I believe. There are many Sōtō Zen teachers in the U.S. now. Many of them trace their lineage to a monk named Shunryu Suzuki, a well-known monk who came to the U.S. in the 60s. He started a Zen center in San Francisco, and he has numerous descendants, Dharma descendants, people who he authorized as teachers, who led to teachers, and so forth. Well over 100 of them. So Sōtō Zen is in a small way quite widespread in America. in the same way that Sōtō Shū is widespread in America. So today we're going to hear from Reverend Ramey. He's going to tell us a little bit about his personal experience. And I would invite all of us to remember this is the Dharma. We share the Dharma across traditions. Even if it's Zen, even if it's Sōtō Shū, there is a common Dharma in Buddhism for all of us. So thank you so much for joining us, Reverend Ramey. We're looking forward to your talk. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
This one, right?
Yep, all the way.
Everyone can hear me fine. Gasho and Namo Amida Buddha.
Namo Amida.
Amida. Namo Amida. Thank you for having me here this morning. I'll admit I'm a little nervous. This is very unusual for me. Had you told me 25 years ago that I would be standing here today, I wouldn't believe it. And not only that, I would have turned back. I would have gone on somewhere else. But to begin with today, I would like to express a heartfelt gratitude to the Sangha here at Tacoma Buddhist Temple for offering such a welcoming and warm place for where people can come and have an opportunity to sit in Zazen meditation together. It's an honor to be here this morning, and also an honor to be invited to speak to you. I want to express my deep gratitude to Reverend Koyama for inviting me and in our group, and to the board, and also, of course, to Eric for reaching out to South Sound Zen, our little sitting group, and inviting us to come here. Also, I always feel it's important that I express, anytime I give a talk like this, is that I express a great privilege, or a gratitude for the privilege to even be here. Very few people in their life find in their life an opportunity to have even the time to sit down. And so I feel great privilege to be here today. Before also a couple of preliminary comments. I want to say that while I have been practicing Zazen meditation and studying this tradition for 25 years, I am an ordained lay priest in this tradition. I am not a teacher in this tradition. I'm a student of now, as Eric said, 90-year-old Jakusho Kwang Roshi, who is the Dharma heir, of Shinru Suzuki Roshi, who was and he is also founder, and up until 2 years ago was abbot of the Sonoma Mountain Zen Center in Sonoma County, California. He and his wife Shenko have been there for 54 years. I also have a second teacher now, Kwang Roshi's son, Hojo-san Nyose Kwang, who grew up on Sonoma Mountain and has lived there with his family since 2002. In the traditional mountain seat ceremony in 2023, he became the new abbot of what is now the only Sōtō Zen family temple outside of Japan and in North America, and recognized as an international teacher by the Sōtō Shū, that is the international arm of Sōtō Zen in the world. So with all that said, I should say that I can only share with you my personal experience today. And like I said, if you'd told me I'd be here, I would have turned around a long time ago and gone back. A couple of weeks ago, I was having coffee with Eric, and talking with him, and I just made the statement to him that said, you know, this practice, I've always jokingly said, this practice keeps me from going crazy. And I was only really half joking. There is an element of truth in that statement for me personally. So today I'd like to try to address two questions. I'm not going to go very long. The first one is, how did I get here? How did I come to this practice? Why would I do this? Why would I could ask this a lot of ways, but how is it that I ended up in a tradition founded by a monk in medieval Japan, you know, that has a set of just overwhelming arcane ritual? And you know, how in the world did I get there? And then the second question is, what is Zazen and why sit down? So I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian environment. Actually grew up as a child in a Pentecostal church. And when I reached high school age, I personally rejected all of that. I could talk to you a long time about that. I'm not going to go into it. After that, as I went to college and went on and got married, had children, for more than 20 years, I stayed away from anything resembling organized religion. It was, to be for me, quite honestly, like fingernails on a chalkboard. As a result, I have always been a very serious skeptic. And a skeptic with anyone who claims to know the truth. And the truth about this life. Then in my 40s, I became interested in Asian philosophy and religion, reading and studying Buddhism in general. And ultimately, I could understand and see with my own eyes the Four Noble Truths. That life is suffering. It's physical suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death. And not to mention the suffering that we impose on ourselves, which is caused by clinging in the face of the reality of change. And clinging to what I want and what I love and pushing away what I don't want. Aversion. Clinging to those things and pushing away. And in those four truths, there can be a path to relieve or manage this suffering in life. And finally, if you know those four truths, the Eightfold Path, which I don't think I can list them all, but, you know, right meditation, right consciousness, right concentration, right livelihood, right speech and so forth. But I was always in my head, always reading and thinking. Then through a series of very fortuitous events, I encountered a little book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. That short book is a publication of talks, just short talks, that Shinryu Suzuki Roshi gave in the 1970s. And I also discovered the essays and poetry of the Beat Generation poet Gary Snyder. That finally led me, through a long story, to Sonoma Mountain Zen Center and my longtime teacher. And I actually began to sit down. And there, for the first time in my life, I encountered the Heart Sutra, chanted around the world and said to compress all the teachings of the Buddha in its few lines. This sutra is central to Soto Zen Buddhism and the practice of just sitting. In it, the speaker is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And what it says is that while practicing deep wisdom, deep prajna paramita, the Bodhisattva saw that all of the 5 skandhas, or conditions of life, form, sensation, perception, discrimination, consciousness, are empty of a separate self. And with that realization was relieved of all fear and suffering. So I'll just quote real quickly from it. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Sensation, perception, discrimination, consciousness are likewise like this. So it presents a formula for compassion, honesty, acknowledging paradox, the Four Noble Truths taught by the Buddha, as well as dependent origination. It presents for me, most importantly, honesty. It presents the reality of life as I experience it, and an approach to life that accepts paradox, and it accepts ambiguity and mystery, and a practice that offers a way to live a life of not knowing. A life that is focused on compassion, addressing suffering, the suffering in life, that is driven by human greed, anger, and ignorance. For most of my life, I equated faith with belief. That is, accepting something as true without knowing. Yet, I wanted to know. So over the years, I have come to faith in this practice, accepting and feeling it as a way to live my life in a meaningful way every day. And I think, and I've overlooked it here, but I want to speak to this. Referring to sitting meditation in Zen Zazen, and also referring to chanting Namo Amida Buddha, or Namo Kanzeon Butsu. Shohaku Akamura, who is the great contemporary teacher and translator of Ehe Dogen, has written, "These practices allow us to return to the original truth our lives are based on. That is the true reality of all beings. Impermanence, no self, interconnection. Then we are released from a life based on delusional self-clinging. The interdependence of all sentient beings and not separate from the world in which we live." So why sit down? Why sit? When I began sitting 25 years ago, I really didn't understand it. But over time, I came to see that for me, that I needed a physical approach to any sense of a spiritual life. I needed to be in my body. My mind was just too crazy. Things were just too crazy. And actually, my wife, Karen, of 54 years, said last night, "I think maybe you're still crazy. I think maybe you're still there." Because of my upbringing, I've always, as I said a few minutes ago, been a serious skeptic on anyone who claims to know the truth. They want to tell me. And I was welcomed into this practice of sitting with no more than that, really, just an invitation to come and sit. With no basic real instruction, just follow what we do. And with the message that here it is, you test it out for yourself. There was no selling, no proselytizing, just come, sit, and practice. So, and this is when I first encountered, and Eric made reference to Dogen Zenji, the founder of Sōtō Zen in Japan, and his life work, the Shobogenzo, now recognized as one of the great works of spiritual literature in the world. And a key part of that is called the Genjo Koan. But before I speak about that quickly, let me tell you a little story. There, and I have two of these little stories. They're in the practice of sesshin meditation. So where you're going to be sitting 6-7 times a day for 30-45 minutes, maybe longer each time, with maybe work practice and a meal in between, those things, a service. But you're going to sit all day. You sit into the evening. And then during that, there's what's called dokusan. You go to, and you can choose to go to an interview with Roshi. It's a highly ritualized environment. You know, you're sitting on the cushion across from this person. And it's like, you know, and the first time I ever did this type of sitting was in a meditation retreat called Rohatsu. And in the last night, you sit all night. And I was in the second day of this 3-day session, and I was in such pain. I mean, it was just killing me. You know, my legs it was so painful that I was nauseated. I had to go out of the Zendo, come back. So then the bell rings for me to come to Dokusan. I go into, and Kwang Roshi's sitting on the cushion. I prostrate, I sit down, and I just didn't have a clue what I was doing. And I didn't know what to say or do. And he said, "You can ask me a question." And I said, "What am I doing here? Why am I here?" He said, "Well, you chose to come here." And I said, "Well, it's killing me. I'm in such pain. It's killing me." And he said, "Well, remember 2 things." He said, "First," and by the way, he doesn't remember saying this to me, but he said, "First, people have been doing this for 2,500 years. You're not hurting yourself." And then he said, "Remember that your ego wants you to become ill." And then he rang the bell, "Get out of here," you know. And I was stunned. You know, I had never thought that I had to deal with myself, that I had to look at my own ego and think about what it was. And so in what's called the Genjo Koan in the Shoba Ginzo, there's a famous line from Dogen that says, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be verified by all things. To be verified by all things is to let the body and mind of the self and the body and the mind of others drop off." There is a trace of realization that cannot be grasped. We endlessly express this ungraspable trace of realization. Now, he's not talking about the annihilation of the self, but the dropping off of the body and mind, and with that, the realization of the interdependence as expressed in the Heart Sutra. So this is at the heart of my own personal experience. Until I encountered this, it never occurred to me that I needed to deal with myself and my ego. And an ego that many would say fundamentally does not exist. And because it does not exist, it's insatiable. So Dogen taught what is called Shusho Ito, the oneness of practice and realization. In other words, there's nowhere to go. There's the cushion. There's nowhere else to go. The physical practice of just sitting is realization. So I'd like to just close with a couple of things. Another little story about Dokusan, this strange interview, you know. This is the second time that I went to, I did a Dokusan interview, or maybe the third. I had been going there maybe a couple of years, and I noticed all these people that had this little apron hanging around their neck, this cloth board, a rakasu, which indicates that they took the Buddhist Zen precepts. And I had no idea what it was, and so I'm in Dokusan, and I asked Roshi, what is this thing that people wear? And he got a little, you could tell he was not happy with my question. And he looked at me straight in the eye, and he said, this practice is not about being a Buddhist. It is about freedom. It's about freedom from suffering and fear that's driven by my own greed, anger, and ignorance. I contemplated that for a long time. And it's how I got here. In the Zen, in Sōtō Zen temples, there's what's called the han, which is a wooden board, hangs outside of the zendo, out of the meditation hall. And there's a similar inscription on that han, on that wood, and it's sort of different interpretations depending, but it's all saying the same thing. And Kwang Roshi put a calligraphy on the han that we have for South San Zen. And this is the han that is struck with a mallet to tell you it's time to come sit. And his inscription says, the great matter is life and death. No forever is swift. It takes life, it gives life. Don't waste your life. Suzuki Roshi's interpretation of that was don't goof off, you know. With that, I'm going to close, and I want to just, I love poetry, and I'd like to read this little poem. It's not a little poem, it's a truly great poem by the great American poet Wallace Stevens. And I think it's a little appropriate given the time of year. It's called The Snowman. One must have a mind of winter to regard the frost and the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow, and have been cold a long time, to behold the junipers shagged with ice, the spruce rough in the distant glitter of the January sun, and not to think of any misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves, which is the sound of the land, full of the same wind that is blowing in the same bare place for the listener who listens in the snow and, nothing himself, beholds nothing that is not there and the nothing that is. Gosh, I think.